Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Inside National Security by the National Security Academy. I have a very special guest today, and it is Bill Braniff. It's great to speak with you. He's a very distinguished professional in the field of national security, counterterrorism. He was active at West Point. He served in the military and then later worked at the Department of Homeland Security. Well, I'm very much looking forward to the conversation. Thank you very much for your time.
It is definitely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So let's see where all this started, where your career started. It'd be great if you could briefly mention the different career experiences that you had, but more importantly, how the journey began in the first place.
Sure. Um, so I went to West Point out of high school. I was the first kid in my high school to go to West Point, and I don't come from a military family. My grandfather on my mother's side fought in World War II, or at least volunteered in World War II. But I think he came out of the army at a lower rank than he went in. He wasn't exactly, which is not actually possible, but didn't necessarily have a very distinguished career, but was a very patriotic, immigrant American. His family was Hungarian, and he and all of his brothers volunteered and served, and that meant a lot to him his whole life, and it definitely impacted me. But it's not like I had this military tradition I was living up to. I honestly just wanted to know if I could make it through. Could I do it? I was a 17, 18-year-old kid, and I wanted to know if I could tough it out. So I can't say that it was necessarily about public service then, although I was idealistic as a kid and I liked the idea of public service, but that wasn't the thing. The thing was more just, could a short, not so athletic kid make it through West Point? Um, and it turned out that it was a really important challenge. I served for 5 years in the Army. I got out after my company command. And I there were things about the army that I loved, and primarily that was the soldiers. Like I just really liked people, and I loved how diverse the military was in terms of backgrounds. My tank platoon spoke like 7 languages, and there was only 12 of us, right? I mean, it was incredibly cool to be surrounded by that many different people with different backgrounds, and all be on the same team. It was just colorful and fun and wild. Like it was a pretty wild experience. But I wasn't in love with the army. I didn't. That wasn't who I was professionally. I didn't know who I was yet professionally, but that was close, but not quite it. And I'm of the 9/11 generation. I was in the army on 9/11, and once that happened, I was like, I have got to figure this out. Like, what just happened? Why did it just happen? For younger people who might hear this or see this, it's hard to capture the strategic surprise of that moment. I remember going to work. I was in Germany at the time, and one of my non-commissioned officers said, "Hey, sir, are we going to war?" And I said, "Yes. I just don't know where." Like I had no idea, right? And I wasn't alone in just being completely dumbfounded. Um, and so I was part of the national security generation that was trying to figure out like what just happened. Is it going to happen again on September 12th? Is it going to happen on September 11th, 2002? Like we just didn't know. So I got out of the military to go to grad school and try to study this topic. It was hard to do in 2005, 2006. There just weren't many places that had any expertise. There weren't many researchers who focused on terrorism. There were several, but they were mostly, they could write you a great case study on the FARC in Colombia,
Mhm.
but like this was new and different, and it's seemingly very exotic. Um, so I did my best in grad school to try to study this topic, but really you had to go to work to do this work. And so I worked in nuclear counterterrorism for 2 years at the National Nuclear Security Administration, helping to secure nuclear weapons, nuclear material across the former Soviet Union to prevent them from getting onto the black market or into the back of a Chechen, pickup truck. Um, so nuclear counterterrorism, interesting, super impressive human beings working at NNSA, your average bi or trilingual nuclear physicist, like real dummies, real slackers. It was like my first job out of the army, and you're like, holy cow, everybody's brilliant. and they go back and forth to Siberia to secure nuclear weapons and nuclear material. Like, there are a lot of ways to serve that I had no idea existed. Um, Cool job, not what I wanted to do forever. Lots of managing scope, cost, and schedule of like projects to secure this material. And it was anti-terrorism doctrinally, not counterterrorism. And I wanted to get into the counterterrorism fight, right? The more, how do we disrupt the bad guy, not just protect the stuff we don't want them to have. And so lucked into a job at the West Point's Combating Terrorism Center, which was a research center that had a really applied mission. And specifically, my job was to take the research at the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point and distill that for training for the professional counterterrorism community. So I ran the FBI's counterterrorism training for 5 years. I ran training at CIA University. I ran training for Joint Special Operations University. I ran training for state and local law enforcement. Taught a course at the Foreign Service Institute. And so I got to see and meet the interagency through training. But I mean, I literally got to like see how they see this world. How do they see these problems? What are their challenges? And I got to work with academics who were brilliant to then try to distill what they knew so that it could be useful for real people with real jobs. I did that for 5 years and it was awesome. Crazy op tempo. I mean, we're just training in classrooms. I don't want to like exaggerate it, but to give people a sense of like the counterterrorism apparatus in 2010. In 2010, I was on the road, or my team was training 4 out of 5 business days. We were somewhere doing counterterrorism training on Al Qaeda and the global jihadist movement. So we were humping, like we were moving really quick, and it was like fascinating. And wound up getting a job at the University of Maryland at a research center called START. Spent 11 years leading a research center that was really trying to advance the scientific study of terrorism so that we could be more effective with our counterterrorism, programs and expenditures. So we really worked very closely with the government from START, which at the time was the largest research center in the world studying terrorism. Went to government for 2 years to lead the terrorism prevention office at DHS, and came to PERIL at American University in April when the office that I led was dismantled or being dismantled. So I came to sort of try to lead the terrorism prevention mission from outside of government for the time being.
Mm-hmm. I know that many young professionals that want to get into the field of national security, their dream is to get into West Point, which you did, right? How was your experience there? Did you enjoy it? Would you recommend it? What are the main lessons you learned at West
Yeah,
Point?
no, I mean, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't enjoy it much at all. It was challenging. I went to a really good public high school in New Jersey, so I was well prepped for the academics, but the academics are brutal for a lot of people who, if they didn't go to like a really good, high school that got them ready for a lot of math and science. It could be really, really brutal. The academic part wasn't the hardest part for me, and I really enjoyed getting to like mentor and tutor my classmates. Like that was something I found I naturally gravitated towards, which is like interesting. You have these experiences along the way, and you don't really realize that maybe they're unearthing who you actually are professionally. I thought I was supposed to be a tanker, an armor officer, and then when I went to grad school, I applied for the FBI and the CIA, and I thought I was supposed to be the guy with the gun and the badge or the whatever. And it turns out that I'm an intellectual who really likes to think about these issues and then prepare, be the trainer or the educator or the mentor or the person helping the man or woman with the gun figure out how to do their jobs better. But I'm that middleman, right? I'm that guy. It took me a while to figure that out. I love the fact that West Point made me do all made me run and lift and speak, present professionally. You had to be all of these different things. It didn't let you just be a nerd or just be an athlete or just be, and I turns out that I really like that well-rounded, you have to do all of those things. And I think that it actually helps you be very, kind of adaptable and flexible professionally. If you're out of your comfort zone a lot of the time, you then get more comfortable being out of your comfort zone. And so now I don't really mind uncertainty. I don't really mind being out of my environment. It sort of was the norm for 4 years. And then, 5 years in the military, you're always out of your comfort zone. You're always making decisions with less than certain information. Um, and I think that it's helped me be a leader in civilian roles because I'm pretty wildly comfortable with uncertainty and being a different thing in whatever the moment calls for, kind of a chameleon that can go back and forth in different environments or with different audiences. And I think West Point, helped me on that. But I mean, it wasn't fun. Like I didn't enjoy it. So I tried to make up for it, when I got out. I'm not sure if it worked, but
And being that you led these different trainings, you mentioned the CIA University and other agencies, right? You mentioned interagencies, working with different ones. How would you describe the culture at these different agencies? Which ones caught your attention most?
yeah.
I heard that they're very different, right?
Yes, it's a great question. I love that question. And I think that for people who are thinking about who they want to be professionally, one of the biggest ingredients for that recipe is where will you jive with the culture so that it doesn't feel like you're swimming upstream or organizations often have pretty strong cultures, and it really matters finding the right one. FBI it's a gun and badge culture, so the special agents are still the sort of first class citizens. They talk about being an intelligence-led law enforcement organization, but and they've made real improvements in elevating the role of analysts, but it's still a special agent, driven culture. And because the success metrics for a special agent is to open cases and close cases, your world, if you're an FBI special agent, is your caseload. And if it's outside of your case, like your investigations, it's not important. And so you need to dot every I and cross every T in your caseload so that when that case is closed, it can be prosecuted in open court of law, and the U.S. attorney has a slam, or the assistant U.S. attorney has a slam dunk case. So it's very much a detail oriented, um, I'll say sort of confined job. Like your job is left and right. Like these are your left and right limits, and you stay within them because that's really what the incentive structure is around. So it's not necessarily a place where like creativity, and I mean creativity within those parameters, yeah, absolutely. But like if you're a strategic thinker and you want to solve complex strategic problems, as an analyst, you probably don't want to be an FBI analyst because an FBI analyst is going to support that caseload. You're going to be, you might want to go to someplace that has a bigger, broader remit, right? The State Department has an intelligence agency called INR, Intelligence and Research, and it's a very small intelligence shop. So you might be like, congratulations, you've got North Africa, like all of it, like, wow, okay, I've got to be a big thinker. I've got to be able to, like instead of being super narrow and deep, where you might get at a big intelligence agency like the CIA, I want you to be narrow, deep, expert on this topic at INR because there's just fewer butts and seats. Like you've got to be broader and right, maybe more policy oriented because your client is the State Department. You're not necessarily looking at every problem at a place like the State Department as a security problem because you've got a diplomatic mission. So you want intelligence that's going to help advance diplomacy. That actually means you're looking for opportunity just as much as you're looking for threat.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're in the DoD's intelligence apparatus, like it's like how many ways can they kill us, right? How many battleships, how many tanks, how many drones? So like these cultures really shape the way you think about even what the problem set is that you're looking at. It's based on the mission set of the broader organization. CIA is more academic. FBI is more litigious and sort of law enforcement, legalistic. NNSA was like programmatic. Like how do we like literally like have a project with a budget, a scope, and a schedule to brick up all the windows in this nuclear facility in this former Soviet Union country so that the nuclear stuff in the middle of that building is harder to grow legs. Like they have these different cultures that really can fundamentally change what your day-to-day life is like. Um, yeah.
And I would like that you mention or speak a bit more on your time at the Department of Homeland Security, right? And especially having a very senior role there. What did your day-to-day look like? What was your main focus area? And what sparked your interest most working there?
Yeah, let me maybe start at the back, the last question, and work forward. So, very proud of the counterterrorism work that I did or supported or enabled, but also it got frustrating because, a decade after 9/11, 11 years, 12 years, 13 years after 9/11, we were still responding to 9/11, and we were still using traditional counterterrorism tools. And even though we knew, like you hear every general officer and every senior ranking official say, we can't kill or capture our way out of this. We were absolutely trying to kill and capture our way out of this. Like that's what we spent our money on. That's what we trained for. That like it was, we were just countering already mobilizing bad guys with kinetic and legal force. And we were exquisitely good at that. And the number of conflict zones increased, and the number of individuals inspired by Al Qaeda and its global jihadist movement increased. And then we got ISIS, which was this horrible, um, manifestation of the global jihadist movement. And so around 2014, I started getting very frustrated and like looking for alternatives to traditional counterterrorism. It's essential, but it's not strategy. Like it, we weren't decreasing the frequency and lethality and geographic spread of terrorism. We were just trying to sort of disrupt it from the next homeland attack. So I wound up when I was at a research center called START, I mentioned at the University of Maryland, looking at alternatives with other researchers. And it turns out that there's 40 years of literature and experience on violence prevention in the public health domain. So suicide prevention, preventing violence against children, preventing intimate partner violence, preventing community-based violence. It turns out that we actually know a lot about violence prevention, and we never bothered to ask those people if what they know about violence prevention could apply to hate crime, terrorism, grievance-based violence like school shootings or workplace violence. And it turns out that that's human violence. It felt very exotic to us. It felt like national security violence. It felt like Homeland Security violence because 9/11 cast such a long shadow. But 9/11 is the most anomalous terrorist attack in all of human history. And we built an apparatus around it instead of building an apparatus around human violence and preventing humans from ever seeing violence as the solution. It turns out that when people really struggle with something like an underlying risk factor, and they don't get support, what we call protective factors, they start to self-medicate on ideology, on hate, on violence for violence sake. And by the time that that's happening, right, they join an organization, the only real tools we have are to kill or capture them. And that doesn't actually solve any of the problems. It just delays risk. It prevents, risk in the moment. And so I started to think about I was theorizing about how do you apply public health violence prevention principles to targeted violence like terrorism, hate crime, and grievance-based violence. So I started writing about that with other researchers at START. And sure enough, the Department of Homeland Security actually adopted it as their strategy at the start of the Biden administration, a public health informed approach to terrorism prevention. But on paper, not in reality. Meaning it takes a while for a government to like retool its engine, right? These things don't happen overnight. And so 2 years into the Biden administration, I was approached to be a political appointee and to run the terrorism prevention office at DHS. And I declined to take the job as a political appointee. I thought it was incredibly important that this not be led by a political appointee. This should not be a politicized position. The office shouldn't be politicized. It's about protecting every American, all Americans from political violence, from hate crime, from violent extremists, whatever the flavor it would be. And so they allowed me to take the job in a civil service capacity instead of as a political appointee. So I led that office for 2 years as a senior executive. It's interesting for people to know that there's this hiring mechanism that the government has at its disposal. It's called an IPA, interpersonnel agreement, where they can bring in people from private sector or they can bring in people from academia for term limited contracts, but you're a true blue Fed. So like I was a federal employee, I wasn't a contractor in a normal sense, but I was actually on detail from the University of Maryland for a time limited contract. And at the end of my time limited contract, I would in theory go back. It's just useful to know that you can, I'm one of these guys who's sort of always been on the border between academia and practice. And there's a mechanism that allowed me to go back and forth, which is really cool, right? Is really an awesome bit of entrepreneurial sort of HR that the government has at its disposal. So that's how I went in. And it was the most gratifying experience I've had professionally. We actually did it. Like we went from having this idea about it to actually implementing a public health informed approach to terrorism prevention and targeted violence prevention. I hired mental health professionals, an epidemiologist, a clinical social worker, trauma informed child counselor, people who had worked for the state government public health office. And I had great intelligence veterans and law enforcement veterans already on the team. And so we had this blend of public safety and public health and blended them. And then we did that across the country through grants and technical assistance. So what does that mean? We helped to establish behavioral threat assessment and management teams around the country in schools, in universities, in workplaces, in county and state governments. And if someone makes an offhand threat now, I'm going to be the next Columbine attacker. I'm going to start a racial holy war. I'm going to engage in jihad. Turns out 80% of school shooters say something before they do it. 50% of mass casualty attackers say something, but they often haven't broken the law yet. There's no criminal justice predicate that allows you to do a disruption using law enforcement tools, which is why every time we read one of these news articles, it says, well, the FBI knocked on this person's door 2 years ago, but there was no there. There was no investigation. Well, it's because they haven't broken the law. They're not an imminent threat. That doesn't mean they're not really struggling. And they're starting to self-medicate on violence as a solution. So you can do these non-punitive interventions like you do for suicide intervention or drug intervention, but you do it for violence risk. And you treat violence risk, you build a case management plan, and you de-risk that person by getting them access to a mental health professional, a behavioral health specialist, a social worker, job training, like all sorts of different things that are actually the problem that sent them, down that rabbit hole in the first place. And through our grant program and technical assistance, just to give you a couple of metrics, we were 1,172 and 0 in terms of interventions, individual level interventions, meaning not a single incident of violence during those case management timeframes. 93.5% of the people who went through, got one of these interventions got access to help, like a social service, a mental health service. The other 6.5% were either an imminent threat to public safety or they had broken the law, and they were referred to law enforcement. So we created this ability to do an early intervention and get most, 93.5% of the people that were in this pathway to violence help. But we never sacrificed public safety, right? Like we never lost that because we blended these teams on the ground. And it is the cost was about $6,900 per intervention in terms of our grant money. That is nothing. An investigation costs $40,000, easy. A prosecution, $100,000. Incarceration for 5 years, $3 million. An act of a homicide or a suicide, $10 to $20 million. A mass casualty attack, Boston Marathon, $500 million. $500 million. 1,172 interventions for $8.1 million. 1,172 and 0. So it's cost effective. It's effective. It helps people instead of incarcerating them, which doesn't actually help many folks. Surprise, right? So it was just this incredibly positive and promising program, and we got tons of traction in the last 2 years. So I'm hoping it becomes really a transformational shift in the way we think about these issues. I think we proved the concept, and now we have to figure out how to get resources to scale it.
What I liked about that is that you mentioned the prevention, which is more important in theory than the punishment, right? Like in prisons, if you can prevent someone from going to prison, That is much more honorable than putting them in prison. That is, of course, the last solution, last resort, right?
Right.
And
And,
yeah,
and you know, and Cassian, um, and I please like, I've been a federal witness, an expert witness in probably a dozen federal terrorism cases. It's not that I think that we shouldn't disrupt a plot that's intending to kill innocent civilians or government officials or whomever, right? It's not that I'm anti-law enforcement by any stretch, but the law enforcement community loves these programs, because it brings them help to deal with people before they become a criminal justice problem. And so it helps bandwidth. It may, you know, it's expensive to investigate all these tips when they come in, right? So like it's actually been very popular with law enforcement. But just to go to the science, it turns out one of the most important risk factors for violence among violent extremists is a criminal history, right? You put someone in prison, which you might need to do. I totally understand that, but you've just actually added a whole bunch of risk factors to their lives. It's now harder for them to get a job, harder for them to increase their social and economic attainment, harder for them to maintain healthy, positive relationships. They've just been networking with lots of other criminals for a couple of years, right? And so you might delay risk. The average sentence is like 3 to 7 years for someone for a domestic terrorist case. So you've delayed risk for 3 years, but you've actually increased the likelihood of violence in the future. And that is unfortunately an empirical reality. So this is like it's just a way better set of solutions. And what's really amazing about it is that educators have a role, parents have a role, faith leaders have a role, HR, workplace HR has a role. Um, the media journalists have a role. Like everyone can contribute to prevention without being a special agent, right? So it actually, it means that you have so many new opportunities to decrease the likelihood of violence that you don't have when you only look at it through a traditional security lens. And like that to me is exciting because that's how you actually change culture around violence in the United States. Um, there's about 2.6, there are 2.6 attacks or credible plots per day in the United States. The numbers are crazy. So everyone needs to like chip in, and if everybody chips in, we will turn the tide on violence in the U.S.
that's great. And as we spoke about before this, the oftentimes in the public world and the media and so forth, the negative is brought to the forefront instead of the positive. So you might have saved, let's just say, 1,000 shootings or uh, violence domestically, internationally, whatever. And that, of course, does not go in the media, but the negative scenarios do, right?
Right.
And that's just in the end, I guess, how we're wired as human beings to some extent. But that prevention, like we just spoke about, is very important and when necessary, of course, as well, putting the hammer down. If not, then there wouldn't be safety as well. So I
Right.
know that you were also quite vocal about the current changes when it comes to staff in the federal government, right? What's your opinion on that? Would you say that these agencies and that the federal government needs a decrease in bureaucracy and let's just say a leaning out or leaning staff down, or would you say that it's actually important to potentially even build it up? What's your opinion on that?
Sure. Um, the size of the federal government actually compared to the population growth in the United States and the GDP growth in the United States, the government has grown much less quickly than population or GDP, right? So we don't really have, historically, if you look at the line graph, a bloated bureaucracy. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't strive to make your government as efficient as physically possible and as effective as physically possible. But I just spent a lot of time talking to you about a lot of numbers to demonstrate how cost effective prevention is. I had less than 50 employees, and my grant budget was 20 million or less per year. This is a very, very, very small program. And if you added up all of the labor cost for my staff and our grant program that we use to provide financial assistance to build these prevention programs around the country, you get less than one airplane that, to fly someone around the country. Like this is a minuscule program with a massive return on investment, right? Let's say one of those 1,172 people conducted a mass casualty attacks, or but didn't. I've just paid for the program for 10 years, right? One out of 1,172, let alone the homicides and the smaller attacks that would have homicides that would have occurred. So um, I think that there's lots of ways to think about efficiency, but the best way to do that is evidence-led programs that are most impactful versus just thinking that it's about body count. How many people can we terminate? But my office was dismantled, and we've instead invested incredible amounts of money on things like physical security and including sort of the border protection stuff. And I just think that that's actually a very poor, inefficient allocation of resources. It's going to cost a lot more. When you pay for guns, guards, and gates, that's an expense. There's no return on that investment. It's an expense, and you have to pay it every year. You never stop paying for physical security expenses. Rand estimates that we spend $20 billion per year on K through 12 physical security in the United States. And if you look at the number of school shootings and the severity of school shootings, they've gone up almost every year since Columbine in 1999. It's just that kids get shot in the parking lot or out front of the school now. Right. So I'm all about efficiency, but I think it's about being a smarter government and evidence-led government, and putting resources where they actually have the most, positive impact, versus thinking that if I just fire 50 people, I'm going to somehow save money when the cost of what we were preventing is, orders of magnitude more than the cost of our small office. The thing that bothered me, honestly, like the most was the vilification of public service. The idea that federal employees were somehow the villains in this story. I love public service. Like I love the people I worked with. I was inspired by the people I worked with. It is competitive to get a job in the federal government. Like it is. That is, good luck making it into the FBI Academy, right? I mean, like that is really hard to do. To become a national security prosecutor in the DOJ, you have to be fantastic, right? Like I love the public service community. I love the national security community. These are highly, highly competent people who are dedicated and love being public servants. They love serving the public, and they can make more money in other places. And so, it was really hurtful, like personally hurtful to me to sort of see something I genuinely value and love sort of be vilified and use that as an excuse to then I think treat public servants really poorly. And so yeah, I resigned in protest when they started to fire some of my folks wrongfully. And I was hoping to make just a little bit of noise in the media so that maybe, like with the National Security Administration, the story would break that, like, wait a minute, we just fired our nuclear counterterrorism people. They rehired them like the next month. And I was hoping, well, if I make a little bit of a noise about we're firing the people who prevent school shootings, like maybe we shouldn't do that. And unfortunately, it did not work.
No, but I still think it's a very respectable move. It's a bold move, which in the end takes courage, right? And so, yeah. And
Cassian, I think everyone who's thinking about a career in public service, and especially national security, national security problems are inherently wicked problems. A lot of being a national security professional is trying to arrive at the least worst outcome. And that's a hard way to live, right? Like that, I mean, it's just hard. It's emotionally taxing to think, to choose to work in an environment where you're driving at the least worst outcome, and that is a home run, because the least damage was done, so to speak, right? So it takes a lot, I think, to be in this field. And you will inevitably join organizations that sometimes get it wrong. They sometimes do harm. These are imperfect organizations led by fallible humans in really difficult circumstances. And what always gave me the desire to serve was that I knew that they were fallible organizations that were trying to get better all the time. They had whistleblower protections. They had inspector generals. They had GAO audits, Government Accountability Office audits. We had built a profession around public service and national security, because when we get it wrong, we want to get it right the next time, and we try to hold ourselves accountable and all those things. Um, and I was watching as all of those accountability measures were being stripped away. All the lawyers were being fired, the civil rights folks were being fired. Um, you know, uh, and it was not a hard decision to resign. It was, I had 8 incredibly good people who were terminated via email over a weekend for poor performance when they were tremendous performers. And if I let them get fired, it would have been like their public service meant nothing. And so, I came into the office on that Monday, helped them out process, and resigned about 2 hours later. It was because they needed to know that their service mattered.
You mentioned the importance of public service and that in the end is why you do what you do, right? It's a respectable thing to protect one's country, and in the end, nobody can take that away if it's through military, if it's through intelligence, prevention, and so forth, and also the scholarly work which you mentioned. So I would like to know, from that research standpoint, I was in touch with various people managing research groups at various universities in the DC area. How was it for you at the time leading that? What did you mainly look on? What was your focus area? Was it a geographic location? Was it a certain department? What did you look at? What did you learn? And what did your investigation help you with?
Yeah. So when I was at the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, we were overwhelmingly focused on Al Qaeda and its global jihadist movement. So I was an Al Qaeda and an ISIS expert to some degree, and it was fascinating to study the ideology and to understand the ideology behind those movements. Um, in the end, I'm not sure that knowing the ideology fundamentally changed the way we did our counterterrorism work, but it was, at least I was able to help educate the interagency about the history, the politics, the ideology that was informing what was happening. Um, uh, and that was a big focus of mine for a very long time. I wound up being an expert witness in a lot of federal terrorism cases, and my job was to educate the judge and the jury about these very odd terms and references and what, this piece of propaganda and that piece of propaganda. Like, what are those? This person wrote this online. What does that mean? You have to sort of translate this for people, and it was intellectually very sort of satisfying to be able to help the counterterrorism community and others understand what felt like very exotic and foreign. At START at the University of Maryland, we were doing more academic work, building large data sets like the Global Terrorism Database, so that people who had to make really difficult resource allocation decisions could actually say, like, well, how many attacks are in what country? What are the weapon systems they're using? What are the targets they're using? Targets they're targeting? The GTD was by far the best, like the gold standard data set, and it informed all sorts of U.S. government counterterrorism policy and practice decisions. And so not sexy, but like really important, right? Like this was really important data. And then we replicated that with other data sets, like data sets on individual level radicalization to violence. So, 160 variables about a person from their childhood on that might help explain why they went down that rabbit hole, how they, why they were interested in joining these groups, how they were recruited, et cetera. And that was really illuminating to understand the life course journey of these individuals, and then try to figure out how to interdict that. Like, how do you intervene there so that they never get to, column 161, which is, the attack. And that really, I think, was probably the most important for me, because we not only did that with violent extremism, but the research team did it also with hate crime perpetrators. And it made me realize that I had been a counterterrorism expert for a long time, and I didn't know the first thing about hate crime. And think about how messed up that is when hate crime occurs at orders of magnitude more frequently than acts of terrorism. But we focused on terrorism because of 9/11 and forgot at the federal level to care as much about a much more frequently occurring form of violence, which targets African Americans, the Jewish community, Latinos, the LGBTQ community at really high rates, incredibly high rates. And so that was a little bit of humble pie to realize that I had actually been missing 99% of the problem that I thought I was studying. by only looking at terrorism. And over time, the focus went from international terrorism, Al Qaeda, et cetera, to much more of the U.S. Threat landscape, as we saw a drastic increase in the lethality and frequency of white supremacist anti-government attacks in the U.S. specifically. So I started to become more expert on that. I'm not a stone cold expert on those issues. There are certainly people who've studied their whole lives, these issues. But ultimately, it was sort of what all this led me to look at is how do we prevent it in the first place? And that's when I started looking at with other researchers, mental health, behavioral health, education, other fields that do, the public health community that do violence prevention. And I'm very, very proud of how evidence informed our prevention work is compared to a lot of the counterterrorism work, which frankly, like we don't know a lot about what kind of counterterrorism programs are effective because they're often clandestine, covert, classified, so it's hard to study. But you can study prevention because it's overt. There's nothing classified about it. So you can actually get better over time because it's overt. And that to me is really exciting in a nerdy way because it means, God, we could get good at this if we just allocated the resources.
Great. And I know that many young people actually do have a similar experience where they like the practical aspects, but they also have a strong intellect where they want to actually learn about the history of certain groups or about certain events and so forth, and not only battle physically, but battle mentally too, and with a soul. And so, if someone would want to follow a similar career path as yours, what advice, skills would you give them? If you, for example, could start your career off again, what would you tell yourself?
You know, I have found that being someone who could be on the periphery between theory and practice it served me very well professionally because I don't think a lot of people are comfortable in both of those domains. And that maybe is a little bit of an insight. Like, I think I've had more impact by not being a specialist on one or the other, which might be counterintuitive, right? But by finding a seam, like one of those areas where I could be a bridge builder or a connector or a, someone who brings worlds or understanding together. And like, that to me has always been super gratifying. I don't know if that works for everybody, and I don't know how many seams there are to cover, but for me, that's I think allowed me to be more, frankly, sort of successful, have higher level positions earlier than I probably should have otherwise. If I had went through a normal like linear process, I wouldn't have moved as quickly. I think that you have to really, as you go through your career, figure out what parts of your job on any given day or in any given job really speaks to you. And what parts are a little bit like, I do it, but I don't love it, or I don't naturally gravitate towards it. And for a long time, again, I thought I was supposed to be something else. And I was in my mid 30s before I figured out who I was professionally. But I was always interrogating myself, like, what about this is not quite right? Like, what about this is great? Like, how do other people see me? Like when other people think about me, what do they see? Because sometimes other people have less bias and baggage than you do when looking in the mirror, right? I should be this because my dad XYZ. Like other people see you on sometimes more honestly. And so I started paying attention a little bit more to that. And it turns out people were like, you should, go do this research job. And I was like, really? Like I didn't think of that as myself, but sure enough, I found it very comfortable. Like it felt like me for the first time. I wasn't wearing somebody else's uniform or clothes. I was not a great networker because I didn't know what networking was. I thought networking was like self-promotion and being sleazy and gross. And it turns out that networking is finding people who have shared passions and helping them out, staying in touch with them and helping them out. And you do that and you do that and you build like these friendships, these professional friendships, and you help people out. And then sure enough, one day it's time for you to move, it's time for a job transition, whatever. And you've got all this political or social capital in the bank. And you pick up the phone and you say, hey man, I'm relocating to DC. Do you know anything interesting? And your network takes care of you. And because you've taken care of them honestly, like you've genuinely cared about them and they genuinely care about you. So I would be a better networker, maybe by caring more, frankly, about other people and helping them out in a way that I don't know that I did early on. Um, I have found, and this is maybe idiosyncratic, but there are things that you do because you think you should do them for a while, and sometimes you have to do that. Like that's how you get in the door, right? And then there are things that you do that like maybe you're not great at, but there's this fire in your belly to get good at it. For me, I studied Russian because I thought I should. This will help me get a job, through grad school, and it did. It helped me get a job at the National Nuclear Security Administration. But I hated it, and I was terrible at it. And if my career required me to be good at speaking Russian, I would be a failure, right? Like I would never. So that was one of those things. I did it well I had to, but as soon as I could, I dropped it like a bad habit and started investing in things that I wasn't great at, but I wanted to be great at, like public speaking. I was scared to death of it, but something in me wanted to be good at it. And that has been a huge differentiator in my career. The ability to speak well in public has, I think allowed me to move much, much faster. And that's not for everybody, but if that's something that like maybe you think like I could get good at this, or maybe there's this part of me that wants to get good at it, like I would nourish that because it has been a game changer for me, just as a unique skill set that not everyone has. Couple
Mhm.
thoughts.
That's great. Thank you very much. I think we covered, uh, there can never be enough to cover, of course, especially with such a long career and such different paths, which you mentioned. But I'm very happy and pleased with our conversation today. Like I mentioned, we covered many things. So thank you very much for your time. Have a very good weekend as well. And I appreciate you sitting down with me today.
Yes, and I very much appreciate you. Thank you. And I sincerely appreciate the people listening who want to go be public servants. It is the most respectable thing I think you can do. We need you. We need you. So thanks to everyone out there.